Hey, I'm Stephanie, and welcome to Wine Club. This is the playlist where I drink good wine while I whine about bad books. And today's offender is How to End a Love Story by Yulin Quang, and I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. I do want to give a warning that there are going to be spoilers and some shit talking in this review. If that is not your varietal, you probably will not like this video. If you want a spoiler-free version of this review, please check out my What I Read in February video. And I also want to say that this review is solely about the work and not about the author as a person. I'm sure Quang is a lovely human being. But let's go ahead and see what this promised. Helen Zhang hasn't seen Grant Shepard once in the 13 years since the tragic accident that bound their lives together forever. Now, a best-selling author, Helen pours everything into her career. She's even scored a coveted spot in the writer's room of the TV adaptation of her young adult novels. And if she can hide her imposter syndrome, surely the rest of her life will fall into place too. LA is the fresh start she needs. After all, no one knows her there. Except, Grant has done everything in his power to move on from the past, including building a life across the country. And while the panic attacks have never quite gone away, he's well liked around town as a screenwriter. He knows he shouldn't have taken the job on Helen's show, but it will open doors to developing his own projects that he just can't pass up. Grant's exactly as Helen remembers him. Charming, popular, and lovable in ways that she has never been. No truer words have ever been spoken. And Helen's exactly as Grant remembers too. Brilliant, beautiful, closed off. But working together is messy and electrifying, and Helen's parents, who have never forgiven Grant, have no idea he's in the picture at all. When secrets come to light, they must reckon with the fact that theirs was never meant to be any kind of love story. And yet, the key to making peace with their past and themselves might just lie in holding on to each other in the present. So I have to start off this review with my rating, which is honestly no rating because I DNF'd this. I don't DNF books. When I start a book, I will finish it even if I hate reading it or hate skimming it. But for 2025, I made a bookish New Year's resolution to allow myself to quit things that are making me miserable. And this made me miserable. And I did it. I DNF'd this. And I tried. I really tried. I got to page 155 and I just hit a wall. I was not enjoying myself or my time with this book. My eyes were going to roll right on out of my head. I actually saw a great review on Goodreads that sums it up quite well. Matt Hortomeris, and I do apologize also if I'm mispronouncing that name, but Matt wrote, "God gave me eyes, and I abused them." And I figured I could suffer and trudge through this and end up disappointed, or still be disappointed and pick up something else. And I went with door number 2, and I did so after I read a line from the hero that just cemented my choice to stop reading this book. I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. I had so many problems with this story. So first, I want to say that this reads like a screenplay adapted into a novel, so it can once more be adapted back into a screenplay. I do know that Quang is the screenwriter adapting Emily Henry's work, and I have a feeling she has a screenplay version of this story at the ready. But there's no depth. It is very much tell instead of show, which makes sense, as screenplays have to tell the actors and the director what is going on so then it can be shown on screen. Honestly, this book isn't sure what it wants to be, and there are a lot of tonal shifts in this that just took me right out of the story. This romance novel starts off with the heroine's sister's funeral. I mean, that is like page 1. They're in high school, and it's alluded that the sister planned to end her life. The police did find drugs in her system, and witnesses did say that she jumped in front of the car, being driven by the hero. The hero was involved in the heroine's sister's death, and this is a romance story. Wow, that's one way to start a love story, I guess. We'll get into the plot more, but I have to address something that drove me up the fucking wall. The writing style in this is distracting as hell. There was an element that annoyed me so much that I had to go back and count how often it was used because it was that distracting. And that is the insane frequency with which words are italicized. I really had to count. Do you want to know the tallies? There were 249 uses of italics in the first 50 pages. That's an average of 5 per page. Removing things that actually could or should be italicized, like inner thoughts or proper nouns, we're still left with more than 100. Why? It's a horrible stylistic choice. And I had no self-control and kept counting like the maniac that I am, because there are another 104 in the next 50 pages. If I got $1 for every use of italics, I'd have received more than $350 in the first 100 pages alone. Like, where's that fucker J.G. Wentworth? I want my money, and I want it now. Now, please do let me know if that reference is too dated. I feel like that's very 90s, but that's appropriate for me. But seriously, I was more distracted by the sheer volume of italicized words that I barely remember any of the plot from the beginning. It was that distracting. So I know that the book starts with the sister, Michelle. It starts with Michelle's funeral, and then we skip like 10 years or so, catch up with the heroine, Helen, who's moving to LA. She is a successful author, and her YA series is being adapted for TV. She's going to be on the writing team to help adapt her books into a show. Cool. I actually really love the setup, minus the sister death. Like, I don't love that. Don't need that in my story. I thought it was pretty neat that she used the pain of her loss and created something beautiful out of it, as her books are inspired by her sister and what Michelle could have become. I really did like that. So Helen gets to LA, and then the italics stop bugging me so much. No, I can't even say it. Those were still little, like, punches to my eyeballs. But I started not liking something else about this read. Namely, Helen. Helen is not my favorite heroine. She is supposed to be, like, tightly wound and insecure, and she is. But comically so. She is like a deer in headlights in every single situation. This is a woman who has published a major best-selling series that is being turned into a TV show, but she seems to have lived under a rock the entire time she was writing these books. Like, she acts like a toddler when interacting with people out and about in public. She doesn't think to bring a gift or a food item to a party. She doesn't realize that hiking is walking uphill. She doesn't think that she should have something planned to say when she starts her first day in the writer's room, and it's her freaking book that's being adapted. She's surprised that people in Hollywood do drugs. She can't parallel park, so the hero has to do it for her. Please, revoke her license. I'm semi-joking here, as I learned how to parallel park for my driving test, and then I didn't have to use it for years until I moved to Denver, and it sucked at first, but I could still do it. Or was my parking a bit wonky? For sure, but I was still in there. But she can't even physically do it. Come on, she should be able to figure this out. But Helen is useless. Which is hilarious, because at one point, Grant, the hero, calls her a helpless female, and I wanted to yeet the book across the room. I mean, she totally is, but I also did not expect the hero to say it, or at least just say that she is helpless. There was something about the use of, like, female being tacked on there that just kind of gave me the ick, as the children say. Again, I'm from the 90s. I need to keep up with some of the slang. But at the same time, I can't fault him for thinking that she is a helpless woman. She is helpless, but I don't know how that's possible. This girl navigated the world of publishing and created this massive bestseller, has probably done press tours and podcasts and interviews, but she just comes across like a clown in every aspect. She's naive and kind of stupid, but she's also extremely mean. Like, she pushes people away and says she hates hanging out with people, but then is all, why don't I have any friends? It's a relationship, Helen. You have to put some work into a friendship. People are not going to want someone in their lives who actively say they don't want to be there, nor puts in the modicum of effort in maintaining said relationship. She is so cold and has the personality of a wet mop. I also really hated how obsessed with high school she is. Granted, I am a few years older than Helen, but she's still in her 30s. It's time to move on, girl. You are a successful adult, as unbelievable as it is. Like, honestly, it is absolutely hideous to admit, but my 20-year high school reunion will be coming up soon, and I debate if I want to go or not. Because I stayed in touch with the people from high school that I actually care about. The others don't really care. Like, I hope they are happy and living their best lives, but what they think of me has so little impact on my life now, and I'm sure they feel the exact same way. But Helen is so obsessed with being with Grant, the prom king, and beating Lauren, this woman that Grant occasionally hooks up with when they're like both home and in New Jersey or wherever the fuck it is they live. And honestly, I would rather read a book about Lauren. She seems like a cool girl's girl and like even gives Helen like a pep talk at one point. And yet Helen is, eat my dust, Lauren, like I got him now. Congratulations. Are you 14? Okay, let's get back to the plot. I'm done ranting about Helen for now. Can you imagine how much more I would actually have to say if I finished this book? Like, yikes on bikes, guys. So Helen moves to LA and goes to work in the writer's room. But uh-oh, guess who also works in the writer's room and is loved by everyone? Grant. And she actually calls him her sister's murderer. And I understand. I truly understand that she would have very complex and complicated feelings towards him. I really do. She needs somewhere or someone to channel her anger and pain toward, and she cannot do it to Michelle. But he also did not make the choice to take Michelle's life. Like I said, we find out Michelle was on something and came across as very depressed. She was taking her life, and Grant just happened to be involved. Now, in my What I Read in February video, I do talk about how I think Kwang did a really good job of highlighting how powerless Helen felt, and I really do. She carries a lot of guilt and regret, and she has suffered from what Michelle did that night. And by extension, what Grant did as he was the one driving the car. I almost wish, for so many reasons, that Grant had not been the driver. I actually really wish he had been friends with Michelle and he had been trying to talk to her, helping her with her problems or at least lending an ear. And then she ran away from him because she couldn't confront her own feelings. And then she was struck by a car. He would feel a ton of guilt as well and wondering what he could have done differently to stop this from happening. If only he had said something else. If only he had been able to grab her. If only he had had that conversation with her earlier or somewhere else. It would echo how Ellen feels about her wondering what she could have done to save her sister too. And then he and Helen could have had that bond of losing someone that they loved. Him a friend and her a sister. She could still be misplacing her anger on him as she just needs some outlet for it. But then he would not have been the one to hit Michelle. My God, is that traumatic for him? I mean, it's traumatic for Michelle too, but it's also traumatic for him. And now that he and Helen are adults, they could bond over losing Michelle and expressing their grief and realizing that they could like this grown-up version of the other person because neither of them were directly involved. So I stopped reading, again, about 150 pages in, but I did skim the rest of the book just because, again, I hate myself, so I needed to know what I was missing. I did skim to the flashback scene of the night of the accident, and we find out that Helen is running around flushing Michelle's drugs down the toilet. I get that she's trying to protect her sister and by extension her parents. Girl, look at what you were doing. You know your sister had some issues, and yet you spent the next decade despising Grant when he was also a victim of what happened. It's not like he chased her down with his car and then mowed her down. He wasn't drunk and being irresponsible. Like, Michelle forever changed his life by involving him in ending hers. He was not an active participant. He did not choose to be a part of this. And I just want to add here that if you ever feel like you need to talk to someone or are feeling lost or numb or just overwhelmed and having painful thoughts or feel like life isn't worth it anymore, or you just don't know how to live, please reach out to a loved one or call 988 or reach out to the Hope Line. You deserve to be heard, to be understood, and to be helped. It is always okay to ask for help. Okay, back to this trash fire. So Helen and Grant are meeting up in the writer's room, and her hatred for him is so palpable that it makes things so awkward that they then have to go on like this work retreat to hold hands and sing songs and become best friends around the campfire. Helen ends up taking a gummy because she doesn't know how to be a human and is falling over like Bella Swan from Twilight on this hike. And unfortunately, since they are on a hike, she just falls right down this hill, and then Grant offers to help her up and walk her back to their cabin. She still hates him and lets him know this. But within like 2 pages, she is ready to climb him like a tree. It's not like they have a heart-to-heart or talk about anything. She pops one gummy and goes from hating him to having sexual fantasies about him. It was so abrupt that I wondered if my copy was missing pages. I actually flipped back to see why that happened, but there's absolutely no explanation. And then we cut to him having sexual thoughts about her. Yay, so glad I'm here for this. And again, this is about the point that I stopped reading. I just couldn't do it. I did skim the rest of the book, like I said, just to get an idea of what happened so I could write this review. Now I will say, in my skimming, I came across some spicy scenes that made me very happy that I was skimming at this point. The first one is him exploding in his pants like a teenager at a New Year's Eve party at this friend from high school, but they're at his parents' house. It was so awkward. What if someone came downstairs? They are just out in the living room touching each other, and go lock yourselves in the bathroom or put a sock on a bedroom door. Have some decency, Helen and Grant. Not everyone wants to see you two touching each other. I also had to stop reading. As I already said, it was a line from the hero that really just cemented my reasoning for quitting this book. As Grant becomes a "she mine, only I can touch, I will burn your house to the ground if you even think about her" type of hero. I don't like caveman energy for my heroes. Like picking the bear, I would totally pick a woolly mammoth over men that grunt and growl like a Neanderthal. But seriously, the romance in this is just lust. Let's be honest about what it is here. This is not love. It is almost like hate sex, but it's not, because he does not hate her. And at this point, I don't even think she hates him anymore either. From my skimming, I gathered that there was some drama going on with her parents. She ends up getting in a car accident. She writes a letter to Michelle. They have a third act breakup over, I think, a miscommunication. And after having lots and lots of relations, and often in public places, then they get back together and get married. I repeat, yikes on bikes, guys. What a love story for the ages. These two should not have gotten married. And I have realized that I have barely talked about Grant, even though he is the hero. But I can't remember much about him. He was pretty bland, minus him talking about his panic attacks and being good with his fingers, both in his day job by being a great TV writer and when he's alone with Helen. Oh, and he was popular in high school. It's, very important that we know that he was popular, and now Helen is one of the cool kids as she has bagged Grant a decade later. So this book was written in third person, but I actually think this is a book that would have been so much better in first person point of view, which is surprising for me, as typically I think first person doesn't tend to work well, but I also read a lot of thrillers, so I just don't think first person works there, especially when it is the main character having to hide a secret. But I think this would have benefited so much from allowing us to be in the characters' heads. Because again, this is written in third, but we get so much of their internal thoughts anyway. Just make it first. And then you wouldn't have to rely on these 350 or so italicized words, and at least I'd feel closer to the characters. But I guess at the same time, I also don't want to feel closer to these characters because I don't really like them. Now, I have to note that the pacing in this was not great, and it moves really weirdly. Now, again, I think this might be a screenwriting carryover, as we'll transition to a whole new day, but we're just thrown in. There are no page breaks or lines or anything to let us know that we've skipped ahead in time. It's just all right there. And another thing I think that felt more apt for a screenplay were the descriptions and the setting. I gotta be honest, I did not see what Kwang sees in her head for these scenes, as I am not shown them. I'm just told about them with minimal description, because again, a movie would bring the scene to life. But in a novel, I actually need those details to be able to recreate it in my head, and those were missing. Now, there are two minor things that I want to add, and then I will stop ranting about this terrible book. So on page 342, there's a whole ass Scrivener ad. I've used Scrivener. It's nice. But what in the sponsored by Scrivener hell is this? Okay, I just have to read this because I don't... Did she get a kickback for promoting Scrivener in this? Because otherwise I don't understand what this was about. Okay, so page 342, and we're in Grant's point of view. He couldn't sleep last night. He blamed it on a third act problem he was having in the new pilot he was breaking. He'd gone into his office, stared at the Scrivener document where he kept all of his notes and outline drafts organized, and then suddenly remembered the only reason he even knew about Scrivener in the first place was because of a time he and Helen had been working at a coffee shop together. He'd been tabbing back and forth between an outline in Google Docs and his script in Final Draft, and noticed she was using writing software he had never seen before, which he is supposed to be this amazing screenwriter, and he's never used Scrivener. I've written one screenplay and I have used Scrivener. Christ on a cracker, man. It's easier to track all the chapters when I'm drafting a novel, she'd said, and shown him the spine of a story in the left-hand panel. I've been keeping a separate file for the show. I create a new chapter for every day's notes. It had seemed like a genius way to organize his thoughts without cluttering up his hard drive, and Grant had downloaded it immediately. Again, did Scrivener pay her for that? Because that feels so fucking weird. And then again, the other thing is it's extremely minor, but it really jumped out at me because I was reading it and I read this out loud to my husband because I was like, am I the crazy one here? Helen talks about reading Shakespeare in senior year because it's so advanced. But was it just my class that read Romeo and Juliet in 9th grade? It's not contemporary, but Romeo and Juliet is not difficult to follow. I mean, The Taming of the Shrew was turned into 10 Things I Hate About You. I watched that when it came out, and I was 11, and I understood it. It just felt like a point Helen had to make so she could sound so well-read and so knowledgeable. But it's just Shakespeare. We study that in high school. Again, very small point, but that just really jumped out at me. Didn't like it, but I get whatever. In the end, I'm really glad I DNF'd this and did not stick around for the spicy scenes, as what I gather from Goodreads is that I didn't miss out on much. Apparently, I'm also not alone in wondering how Helen went from hating him and wanting him to quit his job because she's uncomfortable with him to wanting to see him naked and banging him in the office. I just did not feel the chemistry between them. Okay, I will amend that for a second. There is a scene that I skimmed where they visit Michelle's grave. I did start reading that just because it did feel like there was actually something between them. It actually felt like some emotional resonance. But at the same time, cemeteries aren't exactly known as romantic destinations. So I guess point for Kwang, but also a minus point for Kwang. I mean, sadly, I think this book had a lot of potential, and there was a great idea here. I feel it was half-baked, and Kwang was eager to get to the steamy scenes, so we bypass all logic and building up their relationship in a realistic and meaningful way. She just wanted to get to Pound Town, and we got there, but I'm not invested in their relationship at this point. I do think she has some promise. She had some really interesting themes and ideas in this, but just didn't really do them justice. Either explore the story of Helen and Michelle and what they could have had as sisters. Hell, even that could have been the love story that needs an ending. The love that Helen has for her sister. I would so read a book about her dealing with her loss and writing her YA books about her sister than reading about her sticking her hand down Grant's pants as he growls and grunts. Give me the love story that's ending between her and her loss of Michelle. Now, normally this is the point where I would ask for a romance recommendation, but right now I'd rather seek out a book, like I just said that this story could have been, a story about sisters and creating something beautiful out of an ugly loss. If you do have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I think at this point I'm going to have to switch to tea to soothe my throat because I can hear it starting to crack from all my ranting and raving. But I do want to thank you for joining me at Wine Club, and I hope I'll see you again.